right. I guess we will go ahead and get started just because it's after 1. Did you work last night?
I did not, but my wife did.
Yeah, I know you said she did. So were you here when they did the, she talked about the SIMV pressure control, Anna?
I watched a video on it.
Okay, that's right. I think Yuritsa was there, but you weren't, and I know we went over it a little bit when you were here. So we'll start with that, just kind of review it a little bit, maybe talk about ways to make changes.
Mm-hmm.
So typically we start out with our babies, 20/5, rate of 30 to 40, pressure support of 10, depending on what's going on. Can you see the vent?
Yeah.
Okay. So if I have a blood gas that's say 7.2, CO2 is 61, what is something I could do to fix that blood gas?
So in that case, the CO2 is high, correct?
Correct. Let's say we're on a rate of 35 at that point in time.
You could increase the rate or increase the tidal volume.
If we're in SIV pressure control, so.
Oh, yeah, it's pressure control. That's right. Sorry. You could increase the rate.
And or we can increase the pressure, which in turn will increase the tidal.
Okay.
So instead of say 20/5, we might do 22/5. So it's going to make your tidal volume a little higher.
Gotcha.
As well as, and you said increase the rate. So we might not do both at one time, just one, see if that helps, depending on how high the CO2 is. So say we have a blood gas that's 7.5 and the CO2 is 30.
So in that case, they're breathing too fast now, or they're blowing off too much CO2. So you do the opposite. You lower it, everything to either the pressure or the respiratory rate.
Yep. Yep. And so let's see here. And say if they're breathing pretty much riding the rate and you make those changes, so say they're still riding the rate of 40 and you rein it down to 35, they're still riding the respiratory rate. And you went down on their total PIP, say you're only at like 17/5, which is fairly low settings. You can also, well, I'm sorry, not if they're riding the rate. If they're breathing 60 times a minute and you're on low settings, you can also lower the pressure support. So instead of getting like 15/5 on those pressure supported breaths, you could go down to like 8, so they wouldn't be getting so much on their spontaneous breaths. And to try to help with that hyperventilation too. Did you have any questions based on the video for that?
Not at the time that I watched it.
Okay. I know.
I'm sure as we go over stuff now, I probably will, but I don't remember anything at the time.
You're fine.
It's a good question.
You're fine. Your wife, how busy is she at work?
Not very. It was actually pretty dead last night, so it was like one of those long, drawn-out nights. And I don't know, I personally went to bed like around midnight just to get ready for this, so I don't know how the rest of her night went.
Okay. Yeah, midnight. Well, usually when it's a slow night, it makes for a long, long night,
Mm-hmm.
You know how it goes. All right, so now we'll talk about PRVC a little bit. So with PRVC, we'll go over here for a second. With PRVC, actually, sorry, operator. With PRVC, it's pressure regulated volume control. And the tidal volume is used as feedback to continuously adjust the pressure limit. So, I'm sorry, that sounded like a bunch of gobbledygook. So the tidal volume, the pressure, we use the pressure to control, I'm trying to say this where you can understand. So we set the tidal volume, but we can regulate how much pressure they use. So the baby can use a PIP of 15 or they can use a PIP of 25, just based on how we regulate the pressure limit to get every breath. And this mode allows us to target the lowest inspiratory pressure to achieve the tidal volume that they need. The mode is designed to provide the set tidal volume, and in turn, you have smaller peak airway pressures and can have a constant plateau pressure. And this just helps with barotrauma and things like that. Do you remember when we talked about it before with tidal volume, how many mLs per kilo we typically use?
Wasn't it very similar to adults? It was like, I want to say it's like the 4 to 6.
Correct. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's see, SIMV, PRVC.
So it sounds like I don't remember you guys going that much into PRVC when we were there,
Right.
but it sounds like it's very similar to adults in the way it behaves for babies.
Yes. So we set the tidal volume. Ours is just a whole lot smaller.
Mm-hmm.
And then we set the pressure limit just like adults would. So if you don't want the adults to go over a PIP of 40, you would probably set it at 40. With the servo I's and servo N's, it pops off at 5 below, so it won't let them go above 35.
Okay.
On their PIP. So 4 to 6 per kilo. So if I have a 1 kilo baby, what tidal volume would you start off with? Let's keep it simple.
4 to 6.
Correct. So we usually start out about 5, if we're starting out. So say 5 mLs for tidal volume, rate 35, PEEP of 5 for now. We just start out 5 or 6. And then, let's see, what the pressure support of 10, just because that's what we typically do. And trigger flow is a little bit different on our guys. So, like usually for little ones, we'll have it on as they get bigger, make it a little harder for them to actuate their breath. All right, so now we're in PRVC. This is I, not an N. We have a lot of our N's running. So.
Is it busy over there for you guys?
We're steady. We have probably 6 or 7 conventional events running and 3 or 4 oscillators.
Oh, well.
Which I think we're probably one of the busier areas right now than a lot of places. Like I know across the street, they are running pretty short. They're only running like maybe 12 people, and they usually run 20 to 22.
Yeah, my wife has been gotten several calls to see if she wanted to get canceled from work, because she works across the street there in the PICU. They've actually offered her to just be canceled, like not even on call, because of how slow it's been.
Right. I know recently we sent quite a bit of 3 or 4 of our older kids over there. One of our trait kids, they're working on like trait care and stuff with them. And I think there was a couple other ones that we sent, no, a cardiac kid, because their PICU was empty. Mm-hmm. So we sent quite a few of them over there to try to help them. But we've been maintaining like 40 to 45 babies is kind of where we've been. But I know across the street, just, not the elective surgeries, all of that stuff. And then they were trying to clean out the hospitals for getting ready for all this stuff. So, and it hit, but I guess treating more people at home than what they thought,
Yep.
Which is a good thing, but it's time to start reopening some stuff. People need to, has your wife wanted to be canceled?
Not really.
Yeah.
Just because it uses her PTO and she doesn't get the differential.
True.
So it's just like, if I'm going to be bored at home, I might as well be bored at work and get paid for it.
Exactly. That's what I'm like, if I'm not doing anything else, I might as well be working. Save my time other times.
Yep.
All right. So PRVC, we are using this more and more. Here, we're actually trying to get them to admit babies on it, or if they come from another hospital, change it over. And the purpose is obviously to control the tidal volume and let them regulate the pressure, just so we don't breathe, a PIP of 40 every breath, or we don't want them to breathe a PIP of 25 every breath if they don't need to. It just helps with, our long-term effects with BPD and chronic lung issues, especially in a kid that's going to be vented for quite a while, as well as the barotrauma and everything else. limits, so we're going to have less than that. So on a tithe item of 5, say we got a blood gas, say 715, CO2 is 58. And we're on a rate of 35, pressure support of 10, and a tithe item of 5. What could we do?
That sounds similar to the first one. So we could increase the rate. And since we're on PRVC, this one we can actually control the tidal volume. So you can go to like 6.
Right, you can go up and give them about 6 mLs per kilo. We will go above 6 if we need to, but we try not to, especially depending on how high our rate is on the vent. All right, so say we have a kid who weighs 750 grams. What tidal volume would we start out with? Or around?
Like 3.75.
Right, that would be about 5 per kilo. I'd say you might round that up to 4, like 4 mLs, and have a tithe item of 4. But yeah,
Okay.
this is mainly the equation because some people are like hard to do the math, you know, converting it into kilograms and doing the multiplication. Also with PRVC, if we get to the point where we're hitting, say with the alarms, let's go to the alarms. So right now my pressure limit is set at 30. So at 25 of PIP, it's gonna drop the breath. Mm-hmm. I might go up, depending on the size of the baby, I might go up to 35. But after that, I'm gonna either start talking to the physician, what are some things that could have changed?
So your upper limit for babies as a whole is typically at 30 starting?
Not typically, it depends on the child. So if you've got a BPD and you're on PRVC, their compliance is obviously gonna be worse.
Right.
So I might have a pressure of 40 be my top, maybe 42, because it's gonna, like you said, dump the breath a little bit less. You know,
okay.
Right now it's gonna dump the breath at a PIP of 30, even though my pressure limit's set at 35, it's gonna dump it at 30. So it depends on my baby, it depends on things like that, but typically 35 would be the most comfortable I'd be going to. But if I'm hitting a PIP of 30 continuously, something's wrong, especially if my tidal volume's on the lower limit. You know, if my tidal volume's only 4 and I'm hitting a pressure of 30, something's wrong.
Yeah. In
so
that case, would you be looking for are you looking for more obstructions in the airway first, or are you assuming it's going to be something more like collapse of the airway?
I would, secretions would probably be the first thing I'm looking at, but if I've suctioned them a few times and it's still happening, I'm going to be looking more for compliance. You know, we don't typically get a whole lot of wheezers around here, you know, until they're a little bit older. So usually their compliance is just getting worse. So I might ask and talk to the physician, see if we can get a chest x-ray, see if they've got some other stuff going on. Or we might need to, if we've got some wiggle room and their gases are okay, we might decrease the tidal volume a little bit just to see if that helps. Make sure your ET tube's in the right position, or might have to go to a pressure control, you know, if they're continually hitting high pressures.
Okay.
Minute ventilation here is generally, our vents leak, you know, do leak compensation, but you know, with something that we don't have on our ET tubes that you guys have on the adults.
I'm sorry, what was the question again?
So our ET tubes and neonates, what don't we have on our ET tubes that you have on pediatrics or adults?
Oh, cuffs.
Right. So if we have a kid that's growing and we have a leak, that minute volume is going to leak around the tube. So our minute volume alarms, we usually set, you know, pretty low. We even will go like all the way down to this, like 0.01, especially if we have a high leak, because it's going to alarm all the time. And then, you know, 2 is probably the highest we're ever going to see, especially on a smaller kid. If it's a kid, we might be higher than that. Respiratory rate, if we're set on a rate of 35, the minimum I might set at 15. The High, I'd probably start at 80, but probably end up going to like 90 or 100 because if they're mad, it can go off a lot. Or if it's just depending on the situation. So we end up using like 90 or 100 a lot of times for our upper limit. And then your PEEP, if our PEEP is set at 5, I usually 3 above and 3 below. So 2 and 8. Do you remember us talking about auto mode a little bit?
Not particularly, I'm going to be honest. I remember some stuff about Nava, but not the auto mode.
Okay. All right. So with auto mode, let's see here. So auto mode. So we have this like book, just as pretty much a power slide, but we'll talk about it. And then it's hard when you don't have it on a patient. We don't have any up here in the unit, unfortunately, right now. So it's hard to see them spontaneously breathing. But it's basically the combination of auto mode PRVC or auto mode pressure control combined together. The vent will support them if they're not breathing spontaneously at all, but if they do start breathing spontaneously, they're doing all the work. So it really just depends on the patient's effort, if they have any central apnea, things like that. So with auto mode, they were looking for a way to improve synchronization between the vent and the patient. And SIMV is really not that synchronous. Have you ever noticed that?
Yeah, I have.
Okay. It's better than assist control, don't get me wrong, but so with SIMV, it does have advantages and disadvantages. You get that guaranteed pressure or volume and a minute ventilation, as well as you can wean methodically, wean the rate or wean the tidal volume, wean the pressure, or increase it based on their blood gases or the patient's effort. But it's not a 100% spontaneously breathing mode. And you're always going to have that vent contributing to the minute ventilation. Where with auto mode, you're going to have, it's like a light switch. So it's on or off. If you have it on, the patient can be supported fully or breathe spontaneously 100% of the time. It responds to apneas or delays in breathing, and it's more it's considered more synchronous to patients, and it doesn't give any mandatory breaths unless the patient is apneic. And there's disadvantages just because there's no measured, well, there is a measured minute ventilation, but there's no like guarantee. It's just based on patient effort. And if the baby wants to breathe fast and be tachypnic, then it's not going to try to slow them down at all. It just gives them that pressure supported breath or that tidal volume every breath. So, but yeah, it's like a weaning mode, but not really. You can use it. We can use it on a baby that's 24 weeks and 500 grams because it will breathe for them. It will support them 100% if they are apneic, which they typically are. So with auto mode, you're going to set backup settings. So you're going to set a backup rate. You're going to set a backup pressure or tidal volume, depending on which mode you're in. You can do auto mode PRVC or auto mode pressure control. You're always going to have your PEEP, and then you're going to set your sensitivity as well as your trigger timeout. And the trigger timeout is the maximum allowed apnea time before the vent will kick in. It's set in seconds, so anywhere from like 3 to 10 seconds, but it's really based on the rate. So it's going to be a longer amount of time if your backup rate is only 20 than if your backup rate is 40. So it's based on your I to E more than the actual seconds. You understand what I'm saying?
I think so.
Okay. We usually start out with trigger timeouts of 3 to 5. And then if you're at 5 seconds and the baby starts having apneas and bradycardia, then you might go to 3 seconds. That way the vent will kick in faster. And That way it just allows you to see what they're doing more. Now, if at 5 seconds, if they're still not going apneic, they're breathing 100% spontaneously, then you might challenge them and their gases are still good. You might go to 7 seconds and then 9 seconds. It's a way to challenge them to see if the vent is doing all the work or if they're actually doing the work. Because some babies will be lazy, and if you've got a trigger timeout set at 5 and it's breathing for them every time, why do they need to spontaneously take a breath if the vent's going to kick in for them? Right. So if you space it out, it makes them start doing a lot of the work. And a lot of times we do overventilate our patients.
You increase the trigger timeout time if they're doing what? Oops, sorry, I think my computer lagged. So do you increase the trigger timeout time as they're doing better?
Yes.
Then? Okay.
As they're doing better, you see less apneas, less of the vent doing a lot of the work. Especially you have an older kid who had surgery and is just using the vent really to wake up, and then we extubate them. You're going to kind of increase it just to see. You start out at maybe 5 when they come from surgery, then you can go to 7, then to 9. You know, we rarely even make it to 10, and then we can pull the tube just because we know that they're okay breathing on their own. They're never going into backup mode. The vent's not having to trigger. They're all spontaneously breathing. But if you're at 3 seconds and you're still having issues, it's more of maybe the amount of tidal volume or the amount of pressure you're using is not enough for that patient. So you might have to increase the amount of pressure or the tidal volume on that patient. Do you understand?
I'm going to just say no, because you kind of lost me a little bit there. I apologize.
No, it's fine. So if I have a baby who is on, say, we'll go to the vent. So if I'm in, let's change it to, and this is not an easy spot right here. So let's say I'm in auto mode, and then you're going to set your pressure control above PEEP. So this is vent breaths. So if the baby goes apneic, this is what the vent is going to do for them.
Right.
So you usually have them matching just because you want them to be breathing the same thing spontaneously as you do if they're apneic. So say backup rate, we put at 30. So the vent will breathe for them 30 times a minute if the baby is not spontaneously breathing. PEEP of 5. Say your flow is 3. Your trigger timeout will start at 3 for now, and your pressure support. So you want that to match your pressure control above PEEP. So we're going to go to 15. So that means if the baby is breathing spontaneously, they're going to get 20/5. But they have whatever rate they want. If the vent is breathing for them, then they're going to get 20/5 at a rate of 30 breaths a minute. But after a certain amount of time, if they're spontaneously breathing and then they quit breathing, the vent will kick them in for them after a certain amount of time, this 3 second, the trigger timeout. Yeah. So say I'm breathing. Do you see the little green thing where the auto mode pressure support is?
Yes.
That means the baby's breathing spontaneously. And you can see obviously the purple breath initiation. So now you see the vent kicked in?
Yeah, I see that.
Okay, and now that green is not there. I know there's a heart there. That means the vent is breathing
okay.
For them. Now, if I'm at a trigger timeout of 3, so that's about as low as I can go for the vent to kick in, and my patient is still having a hard time, their respiratory rate's low, their heart rate drops, their sats drop, I'm probably still not supporting them enough pressure-wise. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So I need to increase my amount of pressure. So increase the pressure support as well as the backup pressure control. So let's say we'll go to 22/5. And then of course we'll have to change our pressure support too, which allows them So even if they're breathing spontaneously, now they're still going to get that higher pressure. So, and in turn, so the baby's telling you that you're not supporting them enough. If they still are going apneic and still losing their heart rate and their sats, they're telling you that even though I can trigger the breath and the vent's breathing my respiratory rate enough, my pressure is not high enough because he's still misbehaving.
Okay.
Is it easier to understand?
Yes, much better. Thank you.
No problem. So we like it because it'll tell us a whole lot of information on even a premature baby. We can tell if they have central apnea. We'll be able to tell if when they breathe 100% spontaneous, challenge them more than with the regular old SIMV pressure control or SIMV PRVC. Because this will show us how often they're going into backup and how often they're not. It gives us just a lot of information. If we go to, let's see here, trends. And then this is set for an hour. So right here, you see respiratory rate spontaneously, respiratory rate total.
It's a little small, but yeah, I see where you're pointing.
There you go.
Oh, there you go.
That's telling me, so right now the baby's breathing 0 on its own and the vent's doing all the work.
Right.
So it'll tell you. And like here, so the baby's breathing spontaneously 23 times, total is 46. So, and when they're matching, it'll do, when you're doing on a baby that's on it all the time and it's breathing spontaneously, those numbers are going to match. So that way you can tell, and it'll tell you the graphs. It'll show you the spontaneously breaths versus the total breaths. And if they're, if the graph looks exactly the same, then they're doing it all on their own and you can start challenging them more. But if there's these long pauses where they're being lazy or they're little and they're going into central apnea, then obviously at this point in time, you wouldn't want to wean this patient. You wouldn't want to space the trigger time out. You wouldn't want to make a whole lot of moves just because they're not able to tolerate it on their own or do it all 100% on their own. Does that make sense?
Yep. Yeah, it does.
You can also do PRVC auto mode. So you would set the tidal volume just like you would 4 to 6 per kilo. So let's say we'll do 5 for a 1 kilogram kid. You're going to set the backup rate, the PEEP as well. You also set the trigger timeout and the flow. So it's really, so now you're just triggering that tidal volume, or you're targeting that tidal volume. So if the baby is apneic, like it is now, it's going to get that tidal volume of about 5, pressure support, and the PEEP and the respiratory rate. But when they're breathing spontaneously, it's the same thing. It's just going to back them up when they go apneic. So we actually would prefer to use this over just straight SIMV pressure control or SIMV pressure support or pressure control and PRVC, just because it gives us so much more information.
Cool.
As far as they're breathing spontaneously, it kind of tells us when they're ready to rean, when they're not, all of that information. If I'm on auto mode and I have a blood gas and say I'm hyperventilated, my CO2's, 20s or 30s, and my pH is high. If I'm in auto mode pressure control, what can I change?
You said high as in like they're alkalotic in this case, correct?
Yeah, it says 745, 75.
Oh, okay. So you just need to decrease the, again, you can decrease the rate or you can decrease the tidal volume if they're on the PRVC auto mode.
Uh-huh.
And you said they're the machine's breathing for them, or are they just hyperventilating themselves?
If they are breathing 100% spontaneously, so the backup has nothing to do with it.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, it's pretty much just all respiratory rate and then the tidal volume you set.
Right. So if they're breathing spontaneously, their backup rate is not going to do anything. So you can lower the backup rate to 10, but if they're breathing 100% spontaneously, that's not going to change their blood gas.
Right.
You understand?
Yes.
Okay. But the tidal volume, absolutely. So you would just decrease the tidal volume, right?
Yep.
And then you could try and space out the trigger time out to see if they're going to continue to breathe spontaneously and make sure they continue to do it. If they are in auto mode pressure control and they're alkalotic, 7.5, CO2s, 20s, 30s, what are the things that you would change?
Would it not be the same things as before, like just decreasing the volumes and oh, maybe like increase the trigger time?
Yeah, so you can increase the trigger time, and that might not change their blood gas a lot, but it will tell you if they can still breathe 100% spontaneously with a longer amount of time interval between breaths. If they do quit breathing, with pressure control, you're going to make sure you change the pressure support as well as the pressure control above the PEEP, because when they're breathing spontaneously, it's just like pressure support CPAP, trial for an adult. So you want to make sure you're changing that pressure support too, weaning it down.
Okay, gotcha.
And then you're going to wean the pressure control as well. So if they do go apneic, they're still getting a lower total pressure. So it's just the dual, you're going to change both instead of just the tidal volume. Some people, like I'll come in sometimes and they've changed the pressure control breath here, but if the baby's breathing 100 spontaneously, that doesn't matter at all.
Mm-hmm.
You need to change the pressure supported breath to decrease the total pressure that the baby's getting to affect the blood gas, really. If they are riding the vent, then changing this will do it. A lot of times the physicians want to rein the rate, and the rate shouldn't even be in order when they're ordering auto mode because it's backup, and we should be able to adjust that based on the patient need. So if they start, their heart rate drops, their SATs drop, and they need a higher backup rate, then we should be able to change it without doing that, and just support the baby how they need. So it's hard to really fail auto mode because if they do go apneic, we should be supporting them appropriately on the other end.
Is auto mode something that's unique only to servo ends, or is it on servo eyes as well?
Servos, this is actually an eye right now.
Oh,
it's all
okay.
we're running. So we have it on both. We have it on both.
Because when I did my clinic at TGH, I don't think their servo eyes had that auto mode.
They might not, just because they have neonatal capabilities on their servo eyes?
I believe they have servo ends specific to their NICU.
Okay. Yeah, so they've probably gotten all those. We're usually pretty much just all servo ends. We have the few eyes left, but all of our ends are running, so we have the eyes available if we need them. But yeah, it's capable on both machines as long as you have the software on the eyes. And it's under, so if you're going in the modes, come on. If you're under modes and you're up here, usually with the servo ends, you're going to have different ones. So you're just going to have volume control, pressure control. Then you'll have supportive modes, SIMV, both. And then below, it'll say like spontaneous. So you'll have NAVA, and then you'll have auto mode. But with the eyes, it's under volume and pressure control. You just have to click this button on or off where it says auto mode. So it might be under there and not available when you come up under vent. Under vent modes is why they might not, it might not be there all the time. Do you have any questions about auto mode?
No, you've done a really good job explaining it.
it's so much easier to see when it's on a patient and you see them breathing spontaneously, and then you can see them not in the vent, breathe for them.
The combination of that, and I'm also a very hands-on learner, so I'm taking notes as you've been talking, but until I actually mess with it, I don't think it's going to truly like cement for me.
Well, hopefully, have you heard anything about? Think Anna's going to try to do NAVA on Monday. So, because that can be, and hopefully, right now we have a patient on it, so hopefully we'll be able to, she'll be able to take you guys into a room and show you. But have they told you anything about summer semester? I know Scott told us to look out for an email later today about it, but I didn't know. Have they told y'all anything about it yet?
No. Last we heard was everything was still up in the air because of the whole COVID business.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, I'm glad. I know these Zooms and videos and online classes, it might not be the best as far as clinicals, like to get your hands dirty, but at least they're trying to get you guys out of there. Yeah,
I do appreciate these videos. These have helped. Donnie did one yesterday that he was talking about like the 50-50 club, something we haven't mentioned since like I feel like the first couple semesters. So it was just like, even though I can't get the hands-on I need, at least I'm still getting quality information.
Like the information, and you can, hey, if you see it out and about, you can be like, oh, hey, I did hear about that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, I feel bad for you guys, but I'm very thankful they're trying to get you guys out of there so you're not, stuck another semester behind or whatever.
Yeah, I do appreciate that.
Because that would stink, being so close to it,
It's so close to the end, and then, this happens.
Yeah. Just kidding. Well, that's really it for today. Do you have any questions about anything?
Why isn't PRVC and the auto mode, why wasn't that used more often sooner? Why is it only now that it's starting to pick up traction?
Well, auto mode is fairly new. And a lot of physicians see it as a weaning mode, so they don't use it as often as they should, because it can be used for weaning, but it's also you can use it as just a support mode, because you can do backup, the whole thing. It's just a newer mode, so there's not a whole lot of use out there, a whole lot of information as far as trials and things. So that's I know here a lot of our physicians are more like clinical driven, so they want the research, they want the the knowledge. As far as PRVC, we're using it more because they're starting to see more trends with it helping with BPD rates and the less barotrauma, the less lung compliance issues. So they're trying to use it more just as science has evolved, because strictly when I first started doing NICU, that's all we used is pressure control, SIMV pressure control. And they're starting to see that you can volume target babies just like we do adults, and they do okay, and they might not need these older BPDs that are still vented and your pressures are still 35/10 and 35/12, that they really don't need all that pressure. If you can control the amount of pressure when they're littler, the less damage you're doing to their lungs as they get older. So they're starting to see more evidence in that, so therefore they're starting to use it more.
Gotcha. Okay. Very cool.
And we have a lot of younger physicians. I know here that, they're fairly newer out of school. So when they're doing their rotations in their residencies, I guess where they're coming from uses it more, So therefore they are okay and more comfortable with it. So they, and know more about it than the older physicians, since it's a more common practice.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a lot of us saying, hey, can we switch to PRVC and see what the baby does? See if their pressures are still low. See if we can use less pressure than pressure control. And a lot of times they'll let us. Any other questions?
No, I think that's it for now. Thank you so much.
Oh, no problem. Thanks for coming on today. And
yeah, absolutely.
hopefully your wife gets some sleep.
Hopefully. She's not a very good sleeper, so I actually packed up my laptop and moved to like our far room. So I was afraid that my voice carries.
Yeah, wake her up. Yeah, well, she'll understand too, but still, night
Mhm.
shift is not when you can't sleep. Not when you're not a good sleeper.
Nope.
But good luck, okay? And do you have a test this week?
Yeah, we got one of our finals actually coming
Okay.
up on Friday. So,
Well, good luck with everything, okay?
all right. Thank you so much, and you as well over there.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Take care.